Innovate, accelerate, move technology forward. The startup revolution is now.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our event entitled FinTech and Supply Chain Disruptions and Countermeasures. I am Ginny Puno, and I will be your host for today's session. So, our session will be divided into two parts. For the first part, we will have two keynote speakers to talk about supply chain innovations and different short term and long term countermeasures to address supply chain disruptions. After the presentations, we will have a panel discussion with esteemed industry experts to do a deeper dive into fintechs and supply chains. So, to kick us off, we'd like to call on Mr. Pierre Correa, the president of the Supply Chain Management Association of the Philippines, or SCMAP, the co chair of the Supply Chain Logistics Committee of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and the Chief Executive Officer of Insight SCS Corporation. He will talk about the local supply chain landscape for his talk. So now we'll give the floor to Mr. Pierre.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you for the kind introductions. I'm very excited to be here. Yes, I'm going to be talking about basically the Philippine supply chain landscape and hopefully share some innovations that we have done when it comes to digital supply chain. So basically, what I'll do is first I'll give a brief background of the Philippine supply chain, and then what are the trends, and then what are the innovations that an example of an innovation that's out there. So let me start. So just to give a brief snapshot of the Philippine logistics. So we have 7,641 islands. When I was younger, it used to be around 7,400, but of course, with new technology, they found we have a lot more islands, right? So approximately 300,000 square kilometers. We're actually the seventh highest in number of islands compared to other countries, right? And then we have 2,000 inhabited islands. So with 110 million population, just imagine the complexity. If you look at the right side of the Philippine map, you see how many islands that we need to deliver goods, right? So the supply chain compared to other countries is really difficult and complex in the Philippines. Next slide. So unfortunately, because of what I mentioned earlier, how complex our supply chain is, with all of the different islands, we have the highest cost in terms of logistics cost to percentage of sales. So basically, to visualize the cost that the item that you bought, maybe online or on this from the store, most of the time, 25% of that is just delivered to you, right? So in average, in other countries, the average around 10%. Here in Thailand right now, I think they mentioned earlier that they're around 12 or 13%. For Vietnam, it's around 17%. Indonesia, they mentioned yesterday they're around 21%. We're the highest actually among our neighbors, it's where that makes us uncompetitive, right? Next slide. So remember earlier I mentioned that the Philippines is very complex in terms of supply chain because we have a lot of disruptions. One of them, a global disruption like COVID. That's something that we already have a complex supply chain, and then added some disruptions like lockdowns and all of that. It makes it far more difficult. But on the other side, that supply chain is actually now far more important, right? Because during the pandemic, that's the only time that uh, only supply chain is the one that can deliver the goods, the food, medicine, and all of that. So that really makes it harder for everybody, especially in the supply chain end. Next slide, please. Furthermore, how we are quite visited by a lot of calamities, and which basically is a disruption. So we have earthquakes, typhoons. I think there's a typhoon right now happening. So I saw the news earlier. All of the Roro trips, the one that travels inter-island, has been suspended, right? So no one can travel right now via Roro or via boats. And just imagine, because of that, everything stops, right? So if everything stops, movement of goods gets delayed, and if it gets delayed, it just adds additional cost. That's why we have a very high cost, logistics cost to sales. So that's really one of the big challenges. So not only typhoons, we have flooding, earthquake, um, uh, volcanic eruption. So I was joking yesterday among our ASEAN colleagues that we constantly have these problems. They're quite surprised because for them it's not that often, right? For us, it's very often. It makes it very challenging for supply chain practitioners, and that's where, you know. But the thing is, Filipino practitioners are really great in supply chain, which are really actually honored among our ASEAN neighbors. Next slide. So um, even before the pandemic, during the pandemic, cost has been increasing. So one of the major problems now is cost, right? But even before this year, cost has been increasing. Way back 2020, 2021, there's a constant, because the challenges in supply chain. There are a lot of lockdowns, even locally or globally. There are a lot of ports that are because of the lockdown. A lot of the ports has congestion, so movement, getting of supplies, movement of goods has already been hindered and hampered. Next slide. So I hope you remember way back 2021, the prices of oil, or gasoline, and then I call this the good old days. Next slide. But what happened early this year, it went as high as almost 100 pesos. So it's really because of what's happening globally, right? So this is what we call the nightmare in supply chain, because 60%, 50 to 60% of the cost of delivery of the trucking and transport is just actually the cost of fuel. Next slide. So when we're and it's caused basically by what's happening now in Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine and Russia are the two biggest suppliers of raw materials like corn, wheat, oil, fuel. So because of that war, there's a lot of stoppages, right? There's a lot of higher cost that's happening because Russia cannot distribute their oil, and then the raw materials it's been blocked, right? So which means there's lesser supply, and when that happens with the lesser supply, with remaining the demand, the cost will go up. Next slide, please. So with what happened, it becomes a global thing. Other countries like Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand stop providing also their supply because they want to show they want to make sure that their people have their own food. So food security becomes a big issue. And us Filipinos in the Philippines is a net importer. So a lot of our raw materials we're importing. So we're actually food insecure. So that's one of the major challenges, right? So we're expecting, in the next few months, the war is still raging on. So in the next few months, increase the cost and raw materials will constantly increase. So this really becomes the trend moving forward. Unfortunately, a lot of the industry experts is saying that it's still going to be up to next year. So plus the challenge of the increasing dollar value against the Philippine peso, again increases the cost. So just to say it out here, so in the next 6 months up to maybe next year, please expect that the cost will be increasing. And I know it's going to be a challenge, but we'll find ways on how to solve this problem. Next slide, please. So basically, with all that's happening, what used to be before, the global supply chain is really broken right now with all of the challenges. and it makes it harder for us Filipinos to to um, to combat this kind of, because we don't have control over it, but all we have to do is really to find ways on how to optimize our supply chain and find ways on how we can lower the cost. Next slide. So the good thing, the best update that we have, our president is actually focusing on logistics and supply chain. His focus is to lower the logistics cost from 25% down to 15%, and hopefully, if we can do it by 20, make it lower even 10%. So the focus on value chain, infrastructure, and digitalization are the three key factors that he's looking at on how we can make sure that a lot of the roads and bridges has been built and we're able to actually lower some of the cost. I think Baguio, a lot of our upland vegetables, it comes from the north. What used to be 6 hours, what used to be 10 hours, is just now 3 hours, right? So that will lower the cost by providing a faster route towards the between the supply and demand. So infrastructure is really uh, um, a good way to reduce our logistics costs. So we're looking forward to in the next few years, as a lot of the infrastructure started last year to be online, and then we'll see a lot of the gains and a lot of lower logistics costs is going to happen. Next slide, please. So just another trend that I want to share. The When we talk about logistics performance, it's just basic cost, time, and reliability, right? So next slide. So this three is just a balance of logistics. So if reliability is not an issue, which do you prefer, time or cost? If cost is not an issue, which do you prefer, reliability or time, right? So these three balances off each other, and it adjusts accordingly. So if you want it faster, most of the time the cost will be higher. If you want it more regular, but you want it the lower cost, most of the time the speed is longer, right? So it's really a balance of these three. Next slide. Way back in 2017, pre-pandemic, a lot of the logistics, uh, uh, yeah, a lot of the logistics was mostly cost driven, right? They're looking at maybe always to lower the cost, right? Not really. It's okay if the time is longer, if it's not always there. The major factor is really the cost. Next slide. And then, however, in 2022, because with all of the e-commerce and all of we got spoiled already by e-commerce. So everybody wants reliability now. 77 overwhelmingly, they want it reliable. They want to know when the product will arrive. They want to know is incoming, so that they can already plan out their supply chains. So it's really a big shift, and that happened just in a couple of years. So just imagine how important is reliability now. So it really changed the logistics landscape, wherein what used to be central distribution centers are now smaller distribution centers with maybe 30, 100 square meters, what used to be thousands of square meter distribution space, right? So because they want to bring the product and the delivery closer to the customer. So that's really the trend moving forward. Next. But the biggest, excuse me, but the biggest opportunity is really e-commerce. Next slide. I'm sure everybody, this slide from the Google Temasek report, it showed in 2021 we are actually the fastest. Although our in terms of GMV, we're not the biggest, but in terms of growth, we are the fastest from 2020 to 2021. Among others, we're 93% and expected to grow from 2021 to 2025. I think it's 24%. Next slide, please. So on the Philippine side, like what I showed earlier, it's a 17 billion. 2020 doubled with 17 billion. And yeah, like I said, it's 93%. It's expected to go 40 billion by I think in 5 years, in 2025. So that's really a high amount of growth. And the reason why I share this here is that e-commerce is actually not a retail business. It's not retail. It's logistics, right? It's really the back end that happens. Bringing all of these goods to. It's really complicated to to bring it door to door. What used to be the last mile, the malls, right? The malls, the supermarkets used to be the last mile, but now last mile is direct to consumers, right? So and you have to have very strong supply chains and logistics to meet the needs of the consumers. So the likes of Amazon, the likes of Lazada, they have their own logistics infrastructure already. For Amazon, they own their own logistics, right? So because they really want to control the delivery, and the more integrated, the stronger your logistics is, the more you're able to deliver to the consumer. Next slide, please. So, same in the same report, all sectors are booming, led by the e-commerce, which grew 2 times. Um, and we're still, although it has lessened this 2022, a lot of the e-commerce I think, cut by half based on the discussions I had. But again, it's still going to be an uptrend, right? People already realize the importance of e-commerce. So we will see that further in the next few years to grow continuously. Next slide. And we see a lot of investments way back in 2021. Although for this year there are fewer investments in the space, but like what I said earlier, it's just a retreat because of the extreme increase in valuations, right? So it's always a rest, and we expect by next year to continue that growth. Next slide. So yeah, I've talked about the importance of logistics. I've talked about the landscape, what's going to happen. It's all about increasing. Everything's going to be increasing in terms of cost. All of the issues that's happening. We want to share what we've done also in our company, where we use our logistics network and also digitalization to improve, to connect our suppliers and buyers more directly, where we can lower cost and also provide better service. So my first question is always like this: why is a head of broccoli more expensive than a can of sardines, right? Imagine the can of sardines is very intricate and complex. You have to go to the sea, and you harvest all of the fish, the sardines, and then you have to cook it, you have to can it, and then you have to have a distribution network. So it's highly complex, right? Comparatively, with broccoli, it's normally you harvest it and bring it to market, right? However, the biggest problem is because of a fragmented nature and very long supply chain. Next slide, please. So what we've done, we've developed a digital supply chain platform that connects all of these different players, right? From transport, from manufacturing, from supplier, for last mile, first mile, warehouse, with different solutions for each. And this allows a more integrated approach along the supply chain, wherein everybody can coordinate and everybody can collaborate to shorten the supply chain from what used to be 10 steps to just around 3 steps. Next slide, please. So yeah, so basically the delivery platform is a combination of all of that different softwares, right? The different solutions, right? Just to connect our big buyers, our institutional buyers, to our farmers, right? And then this allows a more direct approach, greatly reduces waste, increases the revenue of the farmers, because rather than multiple steps, it's just a few steps, right? There's 2 to 3 steps before we can deliver it. Next slide. So we connected our correct. So we connected our network from the different supply areas, from Vizcaya, Baguio, Quezon, Batangas, connected them everybody in the app, and then gets delivered to next slide. Gets delivered to next slide, and connected to our cold chain network in Metro Manila, right? So this increases the length of the shelf life of the shelf life and the freshness of the fruits and vegetables, right? And then we deliver from here. We do the processing and deliver it to our customer. Next slide. So because of this, we're able to greatly reduce the cost, right, to the consumers, to the buyers. What used to be, if you look at it, the traditional cabbage value chain, the cost of from the farmers is already 700% when it arrives to us, right? So we lessened the cost because of a shorter supply chain. We passed on the savings. We're able to double our buying price from the farmers, and at the same time provide more freshness, fresher produce using our cold chain network, our logistics network to our buyers. Next slide. There. Yeah, there you go. Next slide. So because of that, because of what we've done, we've had a lot of traction. We have a lot of corporate customers that we've connected to our agri supply chain, and we have a lot of development partners that work with us, with JICA, USA, UNIDO, and also government partners that we work with on this project. So we're running around, I think, 7 million a month worth of fruits and vegetables for these customers of ours. And then we're planning to really expand that more to tripling that within the next few months. Next slide, please. Yeah, there we go. So basically, again, like what I said, I've shared the trend in the Philippine supply chain, and it's a little dire, but we're here to really find and solve problems using technology and using our logistics network. Hopefully, I was able to add value, and I'll be very happy to answer questions later. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Sir Pierre, for your talk. Now we'll be moving on to our second speaker. So for our second talk, we'd like to call on Ms. Chai Obispo, the Vice President of Sales of Investree Philippines, to talk about different short-term and long-term countermeasures to address supply chain disruptions. Now the floor is yours, Ms. Chai.
Thank you so much, Jeannie. Good day to all of you. We've heard from Pierre Coray the digital innovations in supply chain leading to increased demands for SMEs. So this time, even the more remote farmers being involved directly in the supply chain. Now, with the growth of these B2B e-commerce platforms, we can only predict that there would be a bigger demand for the goods and services of the SMEs. Now, this bigger demand is translated into higher capital requirement and also faster cash turnover for the side of SMEs. Next slide. Thank you. Unfortunately, in the Philippines, the barrier for access to finance for SMEs is really high. In fact, according to World Bank, Philippines ranked 142nd out of 190 countries worldwide in terms of ease of getting credit. Now, this is caused by a myriad of reasons, one of which is the lack of financial knowledge of SMEs to comply with the procedures set out by the banks, and also the lack of compliance to bookkeeping and good accounting practices that leads to incomplete financial reporting that causes financing to be rejected by traditional banks. To add to that is the deprioritization by the banks to provide credit portion to serve SMEs. And this is also added by high customer acquisition and servicing cost, the lack of robust credit scoring, where credit assessment is still anchored towards assets, collateral, average daily balance, and years of relationship with the bank. Because of that, 90% of all businesses registered in the Philippines are considered unbankable or underserved by the bank. In fact, on one of the studies conducted by IFC, it was estimated that the credit gap in the Philippines has reached around 222 billion US dollars. Next slide. Now, Investree wanted to help close the gap in credit to MSMEs, and we are doing that through the B2B crowdfunding platform. As a crowdfunding platform, Investree does not lend directly to the SMEs. We partner with institutional investors like banks, insurance companies, investment companies who provide the funding to the SMEs. What Investree does is to match make the SMEs with the credit appetite, the risk appetite of the institutional investors. So we do the KYC, we verify and validate the business registration, we verify the transaction between the buyer and the supplier, and we conduct credit risk analysis. Now, if the transactions passes Investree's credit committee, we convert the loan application into a form of security. The promissory note or promise to pay, which is then offered to institutional investors for bidding. During the bidding, the investors determine the amount and the interest rate that is acceptable to them. And after that, we award the bid and administer the legal agreements and monitor the repayment. We also provide additional insurance facility as added layer for the investors. What makes crowdfunding helpful for SMEs is that there is only one application initiated and offered to many investors with different risk appetites to increase the chances of getting funded. Investor conducts risk-based pricing where transactions that are predicted more risky has a higher interest rate compared to transactions that are predicted less risky. The competitive bidding also further drives the interest rate in favor of the SME. Next slide, please. So in the crowdfunding platform, we specialize on supply chain financing. So we don't accept personal loans or other types of financing. We have chosen supply chain financing because we believe this is the product that will work best for SMEs. Remember, I mentioned a while ago that there is a high barrier of entry for an SME getting financing. For in supply chain financing, the credit score is geared towards both the buyer and the supplier. If the buyer has a better credit grade or more credit worthy than a supplier, which is mostly SME, then supplier can leverage on that and enable him an access to financing which might not be possible if not through the credit worthiness of its buyer. Yeah. So in Indonesia, where Investree originated, they are already offering a diverse um, product offerings across supply chain financing. In the Philippines, we started with PO and invoice financing, although we are working on studying other product types that would be relevant to the MSMEs. Next slide, please. Yeah. We also made loan application and registration easy by providing a platform the to both the supplier and also the institutional investors. So in the platform, the supplier can submit all the KYC, business documents, and submit other information that would be relevant on the loan assessment. And they can also monitor the status of the applications from there. To give us more about how the registration and application process works, let's watch the short video we prepared for you. There you go. So application and loan initiation can be done in a web page and in the comfort of your own home. Yeah, we also believe that helping SMEs is more than just financing or lending. Investor aims to evolve from pure lending into an ecosystem that supports SMEs business activities in a one-stop platform solution. In Indonesia, Investree has already launched some of these beyond lending products, and we're looking at replicating the same in the country. So we have an alternative SME credit scoring system, an e-procurement and e-invoicing platforms, partnership with payment gateways and other SME SaaS solution. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Miss Chai. So now we'll move on to the second part of our session. We'll move on to our panel discussion. So we're honored to have with us today six industry experts to talk a bit more about the role fintechs can play in elevating our supply chains. So this session will be moderated by Mr. Alex Capulong, the country manager of Investree Philippines. He will be joined by our panelists consisting of Professor Albert Tan, the academic program director for the online Masters in Business Administration of the Asian Institute of Management. He'll also be joined by Mr. Carl Labagala, the co-founder and director of Oceans and Ripple Consulting. Then we also have Mr. David Abrenilla, the founder of the Philippine SME Business Network. And of course, our keynote speakers, Mr. Pierre Curray and Ms. Chai Obispo, will be joining us. So with that, I pass the mic to Alex to start our discussion.
Right. Thank you so much, Jenny, for the kind introduction, and thanks to Pierre and Chai for the presentations that we've had. I'd also like to welcome now again Professor Tan, Carl, and David for joining us. We've got a broad spectrum of perspectives today to talk about SMEs, supply chain, and financing. And I guess I'd say we start off with the most pressing concern everyone has today, and Piers already opened that can for us earlier, which is, where are we now with the post-pandemic recovery? And it seems that we've jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire in some sense with everything that's been going on recently. And I guess to start, since Pierre, you kicked us off earlier with your keynote speech on this topic, why don't you open us up for this, and our other panelists might also chime in from their perspective and the sector that they represent.
Yeah, that has been a constant topic we have for the whole year already, with all of the different events, supply chain meetings, supply chain leaders lunch, both with government and also with industry partners. It's really no one really expected. No one really expected there's going to be a war, right, in Ukraine. So, and we're hit by both, cost push, meaning a lot of the costs of serving, especially the raw materials like fuel, wheat, oil, coming from abroad. Um, Plus the increasing strong dollar, right, against the peso, which again increases the cost. So what used to be I saw a meme that what used to be 50 pesos of spaghetti is now at 83 pesos. So that's how it happens. And industry wise, unfortunately, we're seeing it's going to continue to increase. Hopefully, our government partners are able to mitigate some of that cost, via the BSP or things like that. But that's how we're seeing it in the next few months, unfortunately. Thank you.
And I guess Pierre, with the costs rising across the industries, and from the logistics cost push alone, maybe David, you often work with a broad set of SMEs and entrepreneurs from different industries. How do you think this has impacted? Maybe are there some acute impacts you've seen in some industries? And maybe Professor Tan, you can also chime in with these industries, right? Are they able to optimize in some way with the raw materials they procure or manage their inventories a little better so that they can save some more of their finances for that increasing cost of logistics?
So let me share with you a study we did with 10 countries in Asia about what is the impact on the pandemic, and what do they do. And most of them, they are moving from just in time to just in case because of the uncertainty and unreliability of the supply chain. So while we're trying to push the cost down, the more challenging thing is that we cannot let our factory stop operation because of insufficient material. So the whole idea now is to push harder towards more resilient, by looking at local sourcing rather than offshoring, and also work very closely with the local suppliers to develop their capability. So I would say that yes, I think this pandemic have shifted the whole supply chain drastically. The whole landscape is changing, and there will be more local sourcing. And I think people are very happy, especially I talked to some people in Laos. Last time, the Thailand trucks can go direct into Laos territory and deliver their goods. But because of the lockdown, now the Laos will only allow their own trucks to move within the country. So it created a new opportunity for the Laos trucking community. So while we see some, of course, some negative impact on the pandemic, we also see some new opportunities that are generating from the local industry, especially the SMEs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Tan. And I guess that really adds to our conversation now. And I'm sure Chai and Carl are also eager to jump in on this with that push in internal demand with countries looking internal to their supply chains. Let's go first to David. David, what can you say? What have you seen? Has this also been the same in the Philippines as Professor Tan has seen in Laos?
Yeah, I believe the same thing is also applicable here in the Philippines, local sourcing. And one thing I also want to stress out here is where before companies were competing, now they're collaborating. So I see also in the freight forwarding industry, in the supply chain industry, that companies are putting together their resources to actually complement each other's services, whether that is into trucking, last mile deliveries, bike deliveries, and so forth. Now it's like really like where people share actually their data, and I think that's where technology and digitalization play a key role to actually track the data, so that like for you, when it comes to financing, you would know actually where the goods are coming from, where they're being delivered. Accounting softwares, we see a big rise up when it comes to tracking of data. And what before one company was just offering accounting, what we see now a trend is like something called super apps, where it's accounting, CRM messaging, the marketing solutions, the supply chain management of tracking the items that are available and so forth, all together. So now it's the question it's just like whether now SMEs will collaborate together, or also the big players, the big corporations are also now expanding their network as well. Whether that is developing new systems, and if that eventually become companies on their own, or if they're working basically more closer with other SMEs and support them, and bring them into their ecosystem as well. Which is the latter is one that I would endorse because there's a lot of great companies out there, a lot of SMEs out there that really need the support of the bigger companies as well in order to keep the skin in the game, especially in those times of uncertainty, where interest rates are also at the big high, and we also know that that is also not the end yet. It's still going to continue to go up. So that's my 5 cents on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And that's quite interesting that you made that point there on a push to collaborate and increase sophistication, right? Um, we know that most global supply chains tend to prefer also globalized suppliers because of that level of sophistication and their economies of scale already allowing for that cheaper production. But with SMEs, that's just not the case, right? Notoriously, especially in Southeast Asia, development has been much slower because they didn't have as many resources to devote to more sophisticated accounting, reconciliation, shipping, logistics, right? And another fact, and I think Carl might offer more insights into this as you consult for SMEs, right? How are, you know, how have you seen these in more acute cases where SMEs now with growing demand from suppliers and new clients, how have they been now scaling up or digitizing to better serve this increased demand?
Yeah, I think the pandemic brought about a new reality to SMEs, particularly with their supply chains, right? Most of our SMEs, for our clients, for instance, get their raw materials and packaging materials from abroad. So there's that challenge of, in terms of price and quality. um, we have clients right now who still affected by the effect of the pandemic on the global supply chains, where their U.S. suppliers are not able to book ships to send up raw materials to the Philippines. So that's still a big concern for them. So it's sort of a challenge, I guess, to most SMEs right now to reimagine how they manage their supply chains. And actually, in other countries, and perhaps to a certain degree in the Philippines, there's been some reimagining, if you will, no. So they've had to identify their vulnerabilities of their supply chain. Where can they address those issues? And primarily, I guess, they had to diversify their suppliers, getting um, um, from a certain country only. Say for China or the US, you might need to find other channels, no, of supply, and holding bigger inventories than before, because it's cheaper to build up inventories than build up factories. So these strategies, I guess, most of the SME clients that we have, they are moving towards that direction. Of course, aided by the digital infrastructure that we have in the Philippines. But also on that particular note, we do need to improve on. If you're familiar with the latest Asian Development Outlook that was published by the ADB just this October, I suppose, which focused on digital entrepreneurship, the Philippines do lag behind in terms of our digital framework condition, whereby our neighbor, Singapore, where our firm is based, is number one in terms of digital framework condition. So that's, I think, the challenges that both the SMEs and government, I suppose, need to address.
Okay. I guess we'll tackle digitization later and some more of those leakages that we face from slower processes. I guess, but one thing that's for sure is with a shift to just in case supply chain and inventory management, a demand in more orders with companies sourcing locally from, let's say, a bit more expensive, I guess, but maybe not with logistics cost internationally increasing. So what have we seen at Investree with how has this been affecting companies who suddenly they have to invest in not only larger amounts of raw materials or inventory, there's much more demand for them to do it and even faster.
What we've observed is that a lot of SMEs would want to increase their inventory now because they are forecasting an increase in prices later on. So these SMEs are mostly involved in construction. They want to order and secure supplies now for steel, for metals, things like that. But even if they do have forecast later on, the challenge is still on the availability of funds, because for them to put a supply for the upcoming months, they need to come up with, say, a down payment, a certain down payment to secure their inventory. So that's one of the challenges that we've observed so far.
Okay, and that's interesting, right? Like, luckily for some industries, they're able um, to stock more. I guess another question I have for the group now is we've talked about what's happening today and what folks are doing to adapt in the interim, shift more internally to local supply chains and SMEs increasing their capacity and their sophistication. Um, do you guys or do you folks see, gentlemen and lady, do you see that this is a short-term shift where in better times, do you think that supply chains will return to their previous status quo, where they're likely to centralize sourcing from the few most sophisticated players, whether they be a duopoly or monopoly in some instances, or do you see this a longer term shift and positive shift into decentralization, where smaller companies now have an opportunity to level up and hold on to the business that they might take in the next year or so.
Can I start the discussion? Yeah. So I have many students who are from China, from Vietnam, from Malaysia, and all that. And from the feedback, at least 2 years before you will shift back to norm, because this first 2 years, next 2 years, you find China still continue to lock down, and they are building on self-sufficiency supply chain.
Yeah.
Self-sufficient means to just make sure that their supply chain can service their own country. And some of them are moving their factory to Vietnam because the labor cost is low. But Vietnam productivity is also low. So you will not catch up the same volume as China. So whatever you're going to do, you'll find that the supply of the inventory will still be lower than expected, and there will still be a huge demand for inventory all over the world. There's a huge shortage, and therefore it will continue to be the same. And another things that you may notice is that more and more companies are decentralizing their warehouses. One simple reason, we asked one company in Thailand, uh, and they say that, well, if you have consolidate all your inventory in one warehouse, and some of your workers get COVID-19, the whole warehouse get locked down. No goods can get in or get out of the warehouse. So now the trend is to move towards decentralized, smaller warehouses, so that you minimize your risk of lockdown. So there are many changes that are actually happening now that is will take at least 2 years before we see, once you see the COVID-19 settle down, then maybe you can see some daylight of where we are last time. But now it is not possible, at least for 2 years. That's our research finding.
Yeah, I think I can also add to that. Like what Prof. Albert mentioned, I totally agree. It's all about the risk, right, in perception. Um, uh, what used to be in peaceful times, right? So for many years, for decades, actually, we are at peace. So a lot of the supply chains can be optimized. Outsourcing a lot of the manufacturing in China. Even if you've seen Apple supply chain, each part is sourced from each area where they are cheaper to manufacture, right? Maybe Taiwan, South Korea, Vietnam, and all of that. However, the main difference is that risk. Now, with the current shift in the current environment where a lot of insourcing is happening, a lot of the countries wants to control wants to make sure that they're, if I was a president or if I was a leader of a country, I want to make sure that my people are fed, right? So correct, this is going to be a lot, and I'm glad to hear that, affirmed by Prof. Albert that like China, they want to make sure their supply chain is secure. The food security is there, right? So it's going to be the trend. Personally, I think 2 years is too fast, but hopefully that happens, right? So, but it was going to be a long time before we can get back to what used to be. And I agree with Prof. Albert on that one. Even though I would prefer it, we get back to where it was, but sometimes scenarios does not play out the way we wanted. So it's going to be that way in the next few years. Thank you.
Yeah, in fact, another point I want to add is that we talk about getting more inventory now just to secure the
Exactly.
price because of inflation. But on top of that, SMEs are looking for inventory financing because at the moment, while you want to buy as much you can, but you need the money, the capital you don't have.
Yes.
So inventory financing become a big thing. And in the US, they already have a model where the 3PL merge with a finance company to do inventory financing. So they will buy over from the supplier, and then this new entity, which is actually a collaboration, a partnership between a finance company and the 3PL, will take over the title of the goods, and when they deliver, they will then sell it back to the buyer. So what is the
Yeah.
interest for them is to earn based on the, because they're able to pay at 30 that within 30 days, so they have this discount from the supplier, which is also almost the same as inventory financing. Yeah. So this model might reappear in Asia again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Agree.
Speaking of that model in Asia, I think we've also seen an increase in that. Our Thailand office has definitely shown more interest with, as you said, Professor, with what's happened in China, their neighbors, Laos, Vietnam, and Thailand. We've seen that increase, and I think in the Philippines as well. We've
Yeah.
also seen that, but one of the challenges, perhaps David, Carl here might add to this, and Chai, is that as much as they want to buy, one of our big problems in the Philippines is warehouse storage, especially for the commodities that we've been seeing. How have you seen businesses adapt to this? Have they, I guess, David, you mentioned collaboration, been borrowing warehouse space? Have they been converting space, or has there been an increase in demand for uh, decentralized commissaries, warehouses, and other storage facilities in the country?
Well, what I see is definitely the decentralization, more smaller warehouses. We see several new players coming in as well that were into general freight forwarding that are now specializing in warehousing, and also companies that have been in freight forwarding now going more into warehousing. So there is a lot of change, I would say. What I see here definitely is one thing, there's constant change. People are, or businesses are adapting towards what the capabilities are and the expertise of the collaborative parties that they have. So that's again what I say. What I see is collaboration, and then what Sir Albert and Pierre was saying. So collaboration and consolidating. The consolidation of whether these are the products, getting more people together to have a stronger buying power, right? And also consolidating of the different service aspects that they have in order to get bigger orders, or to at least be even maintaining the orders that they have to stay basically also in business, right? Because for one company, it might be they have a higher risk appetite to go out for the opportunities to generate more revenues, while other businesses are really more conservative, and they are afraid of what the future might look like, and they just want to make sure that they have enough products in order to fulfill the orders that they project for.
On one of the supply chain meetings I have attended, one multinational company shared that pre-pandemic, they wanted to have exclusive views of the warehouse. But because of the pandemic, they wanted to decentralize, put more warehouses, but to offset the cost, they are opening up they're opening up the use of the warehouse to even some of their direct competitors. So what we're seeing here are two strategies: decentralization and at the same time collaboration.
Mhm.
We have clients also who are leveraging technologies right now in terms of their logistics requirements. With warehousing, I do affirm that some of them employ the services of several warehousing companies. And indeed, as David mentioned, we do have some clients who used to be just trucking and just trucking for one particular multinational, but now are diversifying into these related services like warehousing and even e-commerce fulfillment, because a lot of these suppliers and vendors are also outsourcing this to other companies who are more expert, I suppose, in logistics and in supply chain management. So we do have that also.
I see. And I I guess we have about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to end our panel on this note. What's very clear from our discussion today is there's been a shift to basically a lot more moving parts. With decentralization, we start to fracture everything. We have multiple people. The sharing economy for warehousing is upon us. Could the group share maybe some specifics on how entrepreneurs or SMEs could help manage this increase in moving parts, and how do they keep track of everything that's going on?
Well, okay, for me to start with in the SME network, one thing that we are very keen on is for all our members is that they have to have a digital presence. For us, it's very, very important, and I think also for many businesses, it's important that you are digitally visible. As we are so used now to meet all the time virtually, and I don't see this going away. I see actually that we will decide actually to meet physically. There will be priorities in terms of like, is this worth it my time to go there? Or most likely, it's more on social matters that you would actually meet with people face to face. But a lot of business can be done now virtually. So for us, it's very what we see the trend is really that every company has to be digitally present, that a lot of the processes are being done as well digitally, so that there's a certain amount of transparency when it comes to also inviting partners into your business. What we see is a lot of collaboration. As Carl was mentioning, we see that trend also that several companies will actually share their resources, but then project as one company, but actually the resources or the risks are being split, right? And but in the profits are being shared. So that's what I would say. One thing that entrepreneurs and SMEs can do is like be digitally present. Number two, have processes in place where you can track all the items in it, so that also financing can be made available. The items can be tracked properly, so that things can basically move up. Thank you.
Yeah, in Singapore, because I'm from Singapore, I want to share with you what is happening here. Basically, we have two levels of upgrading the SME. First level is to get them to use some cloud application like ERP, finance, so that they get the basic data. And then once they get a basic data, then they will train the SME to upgrade into using some business analytics software, so that they can do analysis of their historical sales and then move on to predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics. For example, they can do forecasting based on the historical sales that they collected from their ERP, and then from there, then they can do prescriptive analytics, which means that once I know my customer is going to buy every day, every Monday, then what I can do is to cross sell and upsell. So, what do I cross sell and upsell? So, that will be what we call prescriptive analytics. So, we are trying to move the SME capability by digitizing their information, and also bringing them to a next level of making better decisions with the information. So, But it's take time because we have to train the SME, encourage them to subscribe to those software, and the government actually subsidize some of this software to bring it up to that level. So it takes some time, but it can be done. Yeah.
Yeah, if I may
I
add
would,
on,
I would, yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, I know it takes time, and we're struggling with this all the time to educate our SMEs about the technologies that are even available, because some don't even know what kind of technologies are out there. But I always encourage every SME, just do it. Just and like I said, you will learn along the way, but it's important that we get started now.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to wait. The same way how we always believe that things will go back to normal. No, the world is changing and the new normal is now, right? So we have to adapt and we have to learn to change and to adapt these changes in order to prepare ourselves for the future that we still don't know really how it will look like. So just do it. Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah, adding on what David mentioned, yeah, indeed, visibility in the supply chain is important. And I guess there was this one article from the World Economic Forum which mentioned that a lot of those in the first world countries are really digitizing the whole end-to-end supply chain management. And indeed, that particular digitization or automation or uh, putting in technology would enable SMEs to access more capital, being more digitally present, because um, matching Philippine SMEs with some of our partners in Singapore, family offices and other financing companies, some of them are very particular with digital presence of the SME, and they require, before any SME actually applying for any kind of financing product, is for them to have at least a website. But if we do employ a more digitized supply chain where we can verify POs, we can verify invoices, etc., then access to capital would be more easier for Philippine SMEs.
Yeah, I can also attest to that, right? So we've had conversations with the association with the different members like Nestle, Unilever, P&G. Their common themes that the pandemic was it was their biggest years, right? They've earned so much, and the reason for that is that they're highly digital. I'm sure everybody knows they're highly digital. They know their numbers, they know their ins and outs, they know the supply, they know the demand, they know the whole supply chain. They understand the supplier's supplier to the I think to the third supplier of their supplier up to their distributors to even up to the sari sari stores. They have that data, and they were able to mine that and use it during the pandemic. I was surprised when I found out that it was their biggest year. I think they grew by average of 5 times to 10 times. So just imagine these big companies grew that much, right? So it was a surprising, but it's also sad because a lot of our SMEs folded during that time, naman, right? So you see, that's where the understanding the whole supply chain, like what Carl mentioned, understanding digitization, like Prof. Albert and David mentioned, right? So that's really building that ecosystem. For us in Insight SES, that's why we started with agriculture, the end to end, so that we can understand the whole information and data flow from end to end, right? So that's the first step that we did, and we're trying to copy what the FMCG does, right? So that we can bring it down to the agri sector, and Investree has been there with us also. I want to commend that they really help us building that, and they're very highly digital compared to the other unfortunately mga banks that we talk to. But that there we go. I think that's where I agree with everybody. That's where digitalization, understanding the whole supply chain, um, mining all of this data to get all of that insight, then it can provide financing. We can do inventory financing, supply chain financing, as long as we have that ecosystem information, similar to what the big FMCG supply chains did during the pandemic. Thank you.
I'd like to jump off from what Pierre mentioned with Investree kasi Investree was launched during time of COVID. So it's weird, no? Like some companies are contracting their business, but for Investree, we launched the business during the time of COVID. But it's surprising that there was a good traction because at that time the need for financing is really high, but the businesses could not contact their banks. It's closed for weeks.
Mm.
Or
Yeah.
if they are accepting transactions, they're it's mostly for cash transfers and not accepting papers. So for Investory, I think the biggest contributor there is the being highly digital. Like we're really not getting any papers except from the post dated checks. That's it. The rest are submitted online. So yeah, I also attest to the need to move digitally because otherwise the more digital companies would really gain the market, and then other companies that are not digital or cannot move digitally would be left behind.
Yeah, I just
Yeah,
want to
and
share that to encourage all the SMEs to truly digitize their businesses. Because one thing Pierre was saying, yes, the big guys had maybe some of their biggest years, but also in terms of startup companies, we had some of the biggest fundings last year, more than in the 5 years combined. So that just shows that we have brilliant minds here in the Philippines, great business ideas, and great business solutions out there that can truly help a lot of the SMEs that are out there. So, you know, yeah, I'd just like to also invite everybody, if you are free on November 25 to 26, visit our Philippine SME Business Expo because we have many hundreds of business solutions out there that can truly help you grow your business.
and thank you for that. Very well said, David. And from our panelists, as we opened this last topic about being able to manage all of the new moving parts and digitalization, and what we've come to understand now, it matters not only that you know your numbers in and out and everything that's going on in your borders or in your company, but make it easy for the next guy to work with you. Yeah, I guess that's the theme. And we close this panel off is it not only helps you understand more about yourself, but it makes it easy to speak to the next guy and allow them to provide you the right service or assist you. And with that, I'm sure our audience would probably likely want to connect with us and ask more questions. I believe they'll be sharing some of our contact details. But for now, unfortunately, I have to close off this panel. Thank you so much, our fellow panelists, for sharing your hour with us today. And we hope to hear more from you soon. But for now, I turn back over now to Ginny, our host for today.
Wow. Yep. Thank you so much, everyone. That was a really, really great discussion that we had on supply chains, digitalization, and fintechs. So thank you so much for your engagement. Thank you, Alex, for moderating, and many thanks to our panelists for the insights that you shared with us. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. We hope you learned a lot from our two talks and from our final panel discussion on fintechs and supply chains. So, if you'd like to learn more, you're very welcome to drop by our virtual booth and to connect with us at Investree. Yep, thank you so much for attending, and I hope you have a great day ahead.